Let me be direct. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. Over the past 2 decades, a series of crises in finance, health, energy, and geopolitics have laid bare the risks of extreme global integration. But more recently, great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons. Tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited.
The world as we knew it, as our parents knew it, the world that people who are entering into their 50s now, entering into their 60s, that world that's occupied, that post-World War II economy, that post-World War II space, that world will never exist again. For those of you who don't know and who haven't seen the Davos conference, Mark Carney gave one of, I would say, the best speeches I've heard in recent years, talking about U.S. policy and, without even naming names, U.S.-China relations with the rest of the world. What it signaled to me was that we as a nation, the United States, Trump's actions as president, threatening our allies with tariffs and using their integrated economies against them, has fundamentally and irreparably altered the state of the world. And the world as we knew it, as I've stated, truly will never exist again. I mean, this is the world that my parents grew up in, that have lived in their entire lives. That world of U.S. dominance, of integrated economies, that world of cooperation and allyship across nations, that world is collapsing. And the way Mark Carney described it, I think, is really powerful. That world is not in a moment of unease or a moment of transition. That world ruptured when Trump took office, and especially lately with his actions against NATO, against the United Health Organization of the world, against our allied neighbors, our friends, our countries who rely so heavily on the U.S. as a backing for their economy, are now shifting towards independence as they realize that the U.S. is not sustainable, nor is it a good business partner if every 4 years they have to take a gamble on if the new person who comes into power is going to play nice or going to do as Trump's done and bully them basically into submission. So what do I mean by the world will never be the same again? Well, Mark Carney described it in, I think, a really poignant way.
A country that can't feed itself, fuel itself, or defend itself has few options. When the rules no longer protect you, you must protect yourself. But let's be clear-eyed about where this leads. A world of fortresses will be poorer, more fragile, and less sustainable. And there's another truth. If great powers abandon even the pretense of rules and values for the unhindered pursuit of their power and interests, the gains from transactionalism will become harder to replicate.
Talking about the world of fortresses, basically, of limited international cooperation, especially from the middle powers to the larger powers. I think what we'll see next is a lot of the middle powers de-risking, basically investing in themselves, detaching from U.S. dependency, from Chinese dependency, and building up their own economies, their stronger, more independent economies. And the idea behind this is that the integrated economies, the system that has provided stability for so long, for the past, however many decades, is no longer an option for these middle powers, because it relied so heavily on the fact that the U.S. would hold up their end of the bargain. And what we've seen with Trump is that even after Trump goes away, if someone comes into power and wants to rebuild those connections, the middle powers won't be interested, because the damage that Trump has done, what he has shown the rest of the world, is that the U.S. is not reliable. It's not a system where they can be building long-term economic relationships if every 4 years everything can change. So we're past the point of no return. That much to me and to world leaders around the nation is clear, as we've seen and as we've heard at these conferences. So when I say that the system that our parents grew up in, the system that we have existed in for most, if not all of our lives, most of us, is no longer a viable option, that system is ruptured, and the future we are living in is now uncertain, and new systems will be built. Not necessarily worse, not necessarily better, just new. To understand what those new systems are, we first have to understand the old system that we're losing and how that system came to be. So the old system originated in 1945-ish, kind of after the end of World War II. The US was pretty much the only remaining stable economy, as most of Europe had been torn to pieces or destroyed, at least militarily, and the US kind of filled that power vacuum. And post World War II, the idea of integration became a huge driving factor for the world economy. Basically, the idea was that if every country is interdependent on one another, then none of them can really attack each other, go to war with each other, provoke each other. Because if our economies are integrated with our international neighbors, with our foreign allies, then it makes us much less likely to want to do damage to those countries, to their economic standings, as our economy is intertwined with theirs. For a long time, this integration was seen as a driving factor of peace. In fact, since 1945, since the end of World War II, the integrated economy system that we've been running with has been, for the most part, working. This kind of created the US superpower that we have been so familiar with our entire lives. It's the system where the US provides natural goods, resources to the rest of the world, as well as economic stimulation, buying power, imports and exports. And in return, united organizations accept US leadership almost, and not in a very direct sense, but in the sense that the US has been a controlling superpower, a force around the world where something happens here and it happens there too, right? Basically, foreign markets opened themselves to US goods, US services, and allowed themselves to kind of be at the whim of the US economy, the stock market, New York, all that type of stuff, right? It also created political stability. When the world is working together, we get things like the United Nations, the United Health Organizations around the world. Things that benefit not just the citizens of one country, but the citizens of all. And for a long time, like I said, since these systems have been put in place, this has been the normal. This has been the world that we all know, that we've all existed in. And what Mark Carney is arguing, what I tend to see echoed across leaders from different nations around the world, and what I've come to understand to be pretty true, is that that system is dead. It's gone. It's been ruptured. Trump has fundamentally altered the trust that other countries had in the US as a dominant superpower, as a partner in this integrated system, because Trump has taken that very integration that was supposed to provide safety and prevent war, and used it as a weapon itself. It's kind of horrible to think about, but you see him leveraging tariffs against our allies, and you saw this. He almost immediately backed down, but you saw this with Greenland. He wanted Greenland. He wanted to buy it, and so he put tariffs on our allies to put economic pressure on them. That's weaponizing integration. And so what Mark Carney was saying in his speech, and what the rest of the world is now realizing, is that if you're a middle power, if you're Canada, if you're France, if you're the UK, you're looking at the US and you're thinking, okay, the integrated system that we've been working with since the end of World War II, the system that's been the normal for a majority of these voting age adults, a majority of people coming into their voting age themselves, that system is dead. Integration was an experiment that worked for a while, and its cracks have now been blown out of proportion, ruptured, as Mark Carney stated. And so what comes next could be a couple things. Mark Carney hopes that it's not a world of fortresses, wherein every country becomes self-independent, and that network, that integration network of proposed peace, of, oh, well, I'm so economically involved in your country that I could never provoke or start a war with your country, will be weaker, will not even necessarily exist. And that's a scary idea, because we've never existed in a world like that where nuclear weapons have existed. Obviously, we've had non-integrated world economies in the past, but that was World War II, World War I era. And now we live in a very different military landscape. So what Mark Carney is saying is that a world fortresses could come, but obviously he doesn't want it to, and I don't think any of us should. Integration only works if everyone buys in. That's the middle powers and the upper powers as well. What basically happened when Trump economically attacked our allies was that they stopped buying in, and he in turn announced that we were no longer buying into the system either. The system only works if everyone believes it will. Now that we have major powers like Canada openly stating that they no longer believe in integration, they no longer see it as a viable option for their country's future, justifiably so, that system is done. So Carney used 3 key words here: feed, fuel, and defend. He argued that a country that could not feed, fuel, and defend itself is no longer a country that's sustainable in this modern economy, in this modern world. Trump has shown that countries cannot rely on large powers like the US for military defense, for economic support. Now countries like Canada will be diversifying and investing in local production, in local industry, as well as local military, with Canada itself just approving way larger budgets for their military. And sadly, he argued that the cost of sovereignty, the cost of independence, will now be measured in a country's economic and social ability to withstand bullying, to withstand harassment from the larger powers like the US and the rest of the world. Things are going to get more expensive. Countries that are less economically tied in with others are now reliant on themselves, and not every country has the financial backing to support that system right away. So sovereignty is now basically a price to be paid instead of something given or provided by the system at large. So since we don't know what the long-term effects of this system are going to be, as the new system is literally being created as I speak, what would the short-term effects at least potentially look like? Well, what Carney's arguing, and what I think a lot of countries will follow, is a system of kind of divestment from the US, from larger global superpowers, and a reinvestment and a increase in spending in self-reliance, in local industry, specifically manufacturing and military spending. I think a lot of countries are going to divest from the larger powers and group together in what Carney was arguing should be kind of a middle powers coalition. The middle powers need to, he argued, rely on each other and support each other so that they can withstand the harassment from the larger powers like the US and from China. What I want to touch on at the end of this video here is that a world of fortresses is just sad. It's not good. It promotes less cooperation and less social progress. Things will move slower if every country has to first consider themselves at a much higher degree than they already have. Even Carney himself was careful to note that the world of fortresses that he sees coming is not a good one. It's not one that he's looking forward to, nor one that he thinks is sustainable. So what I hope we'll see is a future in which the middle powers do band together and are able to resist the bullying from the US and China and still retain their sovereignty and independence while working together. If every country cuts off from each other, that's a sad world and a scary one too. Thank you guys for watching this video. I know it's kind of a grimmer topic. I have a couple more videos coming out this week as well, but this is something I felt like really important to touch on. As we work on some of our larger projects, I'll be filling in with these smaller, just kind of me talking at you projects. No interviews on these ones, obviously. But I do have a couple larger projects in the work with interviews and more in-depth research coming forward. Thank you.